Welcome to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. This video uses AI narration to present our original book analysis. Today we're diving deep into Walter Isaacson's biography of Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah.
You know, everyone always thinks about Leonardo as just a painter, but this book shows how much more there actually was to him.
Oh, yeah, it really does. Isaacson shows us Leonardo as like a true Renaissance man, you know, painter, sculptor, architect, engineer, scientist, inventor, anatomist, geologist, cartographer, botanist, and writer. I mean, talk about wearing many hats.
Yeah, it's really unbelievable. And all of his notebooks, too. They're just thousands of pages of sketches and observations. It's really like you're looking directly into this incredibly curious and complex mind.
It really is amazing. And what I find so fascinating is how that curiosity led him to connect all these seemingly different fields, you know?
Yeah.
Like he used his knowledge of anatomy to make incredibly lifelike paintings, and then his observations of nature, you know?
No.
They directly informed his engineering designs.
Right. There's actually this story about him injecting wax into a human brain to try and understand its cavities. I mean, who comes up with something like that?
I know, it's amazing. It shows how much he just wanted to know, to understand how things work. And that's something that really comes through in Isaacson's book. Leonardo's just endless curiosity and his willingness to try things out, even when it meant doing things differently.
Yeah. Speaking of doing things differently, let's talk about all of his unfinished work. It's something he's almost as famous for as his masterpieces. Did Isaacson have any ideas about why he left so many things unfinished?
Yeah, he suggested it was a combination of perfectionism and always trying to improve. Leonardo had these huge visions for things. But he was also always refining his ideas and trying new techniques. And sometimes just the act of creating something would lead him down a new path before he finished what he started.
I mean, it wasn't really a lack of focus, but more like too many ideas and just always wanted to push the boundaries.
Exactly. Take the Adoration of the Magi, for example. He started it, planned out the whole composition meticulously, even painted some of the sky and the ruins. Then he just suddenly stopped. It seems like his idea for the painting just got too big. Or maybe he got a newer, more interesting idea.
I see. It's a reminder that even for a genius like Leonardo, being creative wasn't always easy or straightforward. It was messy and experimental and sometimes frustrating.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's pretty interesting. Even his most famous works, like The Last Supper, had problems. The experimental technique he used made the paint start to fall apart almost immediately.
Wow. And even with all those challenges, or maybe because of them, his work still amazes and inspires us hundreds of years later.
It really does. I think it shows how powerful his vision was and how deeply he understood not just art, but also science, anatomy, optics perspective. He was always pushing the limits of what was possible, like blurring the lines between different areas of study.
Right. And we see that in works like The Vitruvian Man, where he combines his understanding of anatomy with math and proportions. It's such a beautiful illustration of his belief that art and science go hand in hand.
Totally. Like even his anatomical drawings, they weren't just scientifically accurate. They were beautiful pieces of art on their own. He even dissected bodies to study them in detail.
Yeah. And it wasn't just the human body that he was interested in. He was fascinated by nature as a whole. You know, everything from how water flows to how birds fly. His notebooks are just filled with observations and sketches of plants, animals, rocks. It's like he was trying to figure out how the entire universe worked.
That's a great way to put it. And what's really amazing is that he didn't see all these different areas as being separate from each other. He saw how they all connected. He saw patterns that other people missed. His notebooks are full of diagrams and notes that link things like anatomy and engineering, botany and water. It's almost like he was trying to create one big theory of knowledge, a way to bring together everything he saw and experienced.
Yeah. And that's a key thing that Isaacson highlights. You know, Leonardo wasn't just brilliant in these separate areas. He was able to see how everything was connected, to find these patterns that other people missed.
So it wasn't just about how much he knew, but also how he saw things.
Exactly. He wasn't happy with just being an expert in one thing. He wanted to understand everything, to see the whole picture. You can see that in all the different types of work he did. We talked about his art and his studies of anatomy, but what about his engineering stuff?
Oh, yeah. Isaacson talks about all these amazing designs. Leonardo came up with like flying machines, war machines, even plans for cities. Like he was way ahead of his time. He was a true visionary. His notebooks are just full of sketches and plans for things that wouldn't exist for centuries, like his giant crossbow. It was meant to be this powerful weapon, but it also shows how well he understood mechanics and force.
And what about his armored tank? It's incredible, all the gears and cranks and mechanisms. It looks like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Right, and there's even this debate about whether the design flaw with the cranks making the wheels turn in opposite directions was actually on purpose. Maybe he did it to stop his invention from being used by the wrong people.
That's interesting. It really makes you think about how dangerous those times were. War was always a threat, and everyone wanted the latest weapons. Leonardo's engineering skills would make him very important to any ruler.
It shows that even a genius like Leonardo couldn't ignore what was happening in the world. He was always trying to balance his desire to learn with the needs of the people who paid him he needed to make a living in a world that didn't always understand or appreciate his ideas.
Right. And yet, even with all those challenges, he never stopped trying new things. Isaacson describes Leonardo's ideas for Milan. He wanted to build a city with multiple levels and a sewage system. He even thought about things like toilet seats that could swivel. Can you imagine the amount of detail and planning that took?
It's mind-blowing he was thinking about urban planning and sanitation back in the 15th century. I wonder how different our cities would be if his ideas had been used.
Yeah, it's one of those big what-ifs in history. But even though his designs weren't always built, they still show how creative he was and how much he understood about mechanics, physics, and how systems work together.
Absolutely. And it's also interesting that even though he was so brilliant and his work was so groundbreaking, Leonardo didn't publish a lot of his discoveries. Why do you think that was?
It's strange, right? Isaacson talks about this a lot.
Yeah.
It seems like Leonardo was more interested in learning for himself than becoming famous.
Yeah.
He was happy to just leave his notebooks as his legacy to show how much he loved learning throughout his life.
Yeah, that makes sense, but it's still such a loss for the world. Imagine how much more advanced we would be in things like anatomy engineering and hydraulics if he had shared his discoveries with everyone.
It's a crazy thought, but it also tells us something about Leonardo as a person. Maybe he thought his work was too personal or too unfinished to share publicly. Or maybe he just didn't have the time or the desire to go through the boring process of publishing his work.
It's a good point. It reminds us that even the most amazing minds can be held back by their own personality or by the limits of the time they lived in. And it also shows how important it is to share knowledge, to work together and communicate so that everyone can benefit from new discoveries. Leonardo's notebooks are full of brilliant ideas and innovations, but they only became really valuable when other people studied them and shared them with the world.
That's so true. Speaking of sharing knowledge and working together, how did Leonardo interact with other great minds of his time, like Michelangelo? Those two were giants of the Renaissance, both so talented and ambitious. What was their relationship like?
It was complicated. They were rivals, but they also respected each other. Isaacson describes this scene where they were both asked to paint murals in the same hall in Florence. Can you imagine how tense that must have been? Leonardo working on his Battle of Anghiari and Michelangelo getting ready for his Battle of Cassina? It must have felt like a battle of the titans.
Wow, two artistic giants pushing each other to do their best work.
Exactly. But their styles were actually very different. Leonardo was all about grace and subtlety and that hazy effect he used in paintings like the Mona Lisa. He called it sfumato. Michelangelo, on the other hand, was known for his bold, powerful figures and dramatic scenes like the Sistine Chapel ceiling.
Their personalities were as different as their art, which makes their rivalry even more interesting. Did they ever talk to each other directly?
Isaacson tells a story about them running into each other in Florence on a hot summer day. Michelangelo, who was much younger than Leonardo, just completely ignored him.
Ouch, that's cold. It seems like even geniuses can be jealous of each other.
It's a funny story, but it also shows how competitive people were back then. Everyone wanted to be the best. But despite their rivalry, it's clear that both Leonardo and Michelangelo inspired each other to create amazing things. They were always trying new things and pushing the boundaries of what was possible in art.
It shows the power of competition and collaboration.
Yeah.
They were rivals, but they were also part of this bigger movement, a renaissance of art and ideas.
And Leonardo, with his endless curiosity and desire to learn, was right at the heart of that movement.
And this leads us to a really interesting part of Leonardo's later life, his fascination with the idea of a great flood. Isaacson describes all these drawings and writings that Leonardo made near the end of his life. They show these huge floods and terrible storms. Why was he so obsessed with destruction and rebirth?
That's a question that people have been trying to answer for centuries. Leonardo was always fascinated by water and how it moves. He studied rivers, canals, irrigation systems. He even came up with plans to change the course of the Arno River. But in his later years, his interest in water became darker, more apocalyptic.
Do you think it was because he was getting older and thinking about his own death as he got closer to the end of his life? Maybe he was drawn to these images of destruction and renewal, trying to understand his own legacy and how short life really is.
It's a good theory. Isaacson says that the flood drawings are incredibly powerful and moving, full of energy and a feeling of disaster. They're very different from the peaceful landscapes he painted earlier in his life. It seems like his perspective changed, maybe because he was getting older or maybe because of the political turmoil at the time.
These flood drawings are scary, but they're also incredibly beautiful and inspiring. It shows how Leonardo could find beauty even in chaos and destruction.
And that's maybe the most important lesson we can learn from Leonardo's life and work. Even when things are tough, even when we're facing our own mortality, we can choose to be curious, to find beauty, and to try to understand the world around us.
It's a powerful message, and it really makes you think even after all these years. It's interesting, though, for someone who achieved so much in his life, Leonardo often felt like he was a failure.
Yeah, that's something Isaacson points out a lot. This guy was amazing at so many things, but his notebooks are full of him beating himself up about not being able to do things perfectly or master certain subjects.
It's a good reminder that even geniuses have doubts and feel like they're not good enough.
Absolutely, and that makes his achievements even more impressive, don't you think? To be so good at so many things while dealing with those kinds of thoughts, it's incredible.
Yeah, totally. It shows how passionate he was and how much he wanted to learn and create, even with all those internal struggles.
It's inspiring, really. It tells us that we don't have to be perfect to do great things. We can accept our flaws, learn from our mistakes, and keep trying to be the best we can be.
Leonardo's life is a great example of that. He never stopped exploring, experimenting, pushing the limits of what was known and what was possible. He wasn't afraid to fail. In fact, he saw failure as a chance to learn and grow.
Isaacson really emphasizes that throughout the book, Leonardo's notebooks are full of sketches and diagrams of inventions that never quite worked, anatomical studies that turned out to be wrong, and art projects that he just gave up on. But even in those failures, you can see his brilliance, his willingness to take risks and challenge the way people thought.
So what would you say is Leonardo da Vinci's most important legacy? Is it the Mona Lisa or the Last Supper or his amazing notebooks or something else entirely?
For me, his most important legacy is that he represents the spirit of the Renaissance, that desire to learn as much as possible, the belief in what humans can achieve, and the courage to question the way things are. He wasn't just a great artist or a brilliant engineer. He was a symbol of what the human mind can do when it's free to explore, create, and innovate.
He reminds us that learning is a journey that never ends, and that even when we face challenges and setbacks, we should never stop questioning, exploring, and pushing the boundaries of what we think is possible.
Exactly, and that's a powerful message for everyone, isn't it? Whether we're artists, scientists, engineers, or just curious people. Leonardo da Vinci's life and work can inspire us all.
Absolutely. It's a reminder to embrace our curiosity, never stop learning, and always strive for greatness in whatever we choose to do.
And to never be afraid of failure, because it's often when we fail that we learn the most and discover what we're truly capable of.
Well said. For those of you who enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Leonardo da Vinci, we highly recommend reading Walter Isaacson's biography, Leonardo da Vinci. You can find a link to purchase the book in the description, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more mindful moments.